To the Grubhub, DoorDash, or any other food delivery employees, what is the strangest scenario you've had with an order? I worked for a delivery company about 6 years ago. I got an order for a single cigar. Total cost of the goods about $3. Delivery fee $13.50. He lived way the hell out in the boonies. He also tipped me like $10. Turns out he was drunk and delivery fee is less than a DUI. Honestly, king behavior. Not getting a DUI, still getting your cigar, tipping well, love to see it. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. The delivery instructions were to beat on the door like you're the cops and then roar like a T-Rex to scare my kids. I did this, but a small, extremely confused lady answered the door instead. Apparently, the husband had written those instructions for a prior delivery and had not realized delivery instructions copy over to the next one if not deleted. OP is a good sport for playing along though. Huge props for that. Story 3. One time I followed a weird middle-aged guy into his basement for a life-affirming surprise. Delivering pizzas, my attitude is that nothing can really go that wrong so long as I drive carefully, and avoid muggings and never enter a customer's home. When I was younger and hadn't adopted that last rule yet, I delivered a proper stack of pizzas to a really nice house in a very wealthy neighborhood, where I was greeted by a classic mid-50s suburbanite guy. I had like 50 pounds of pizza and he was just vibrating with excitement like a little kid, asking me if I wanted to see something amazing in his basement, where the pizzas were going anyway. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of red flags, but from his vibe and the amount of pizzas he'd ordered, I figured he was having some kind of game night with his buddies and was eager to show off his layout. Wealthy guys love showing these sweet toys they worked for to broke younger folks. And when you're working for tips, sometimes an ooh or an ah at a car or in-home luxury you don't care about is worth an extra $10. So I followed him into his huge house, preparing myself to express amazement at his whatever. We get down to the basement and it was a puppy party. Like a true and actual puppy party, some sort of adoption event he'd set up for his kid's birthday. Exactly as I'd expected, there was a classic rich guy basement with a full bar and pool table and wall-sized entertainment center and huge sectional couch and recliners. What I didn't expect was a gaggle of 8th grade girls playing with dozens of puppies being supervised by handlers. Every kind of puppy I could imagine. I set the pizzas down on the bar and just sat on the floor and squealed and giggled while puppies tried to eat the smell of pizza off of me, succeeding only in devouring my heart through my face. After a few minutes, I stood up all teary-eyed and flushed with happiness, and the guy just grinned his understanding at me, gave me an envelope of cash, and sent me on my way. The hit of oxytocin and the serotonin from those puppies still warms me years later. Frickin' puppy party, man. Ugh, my life is fuller knowing that can ever happen. This setup made it sound like it was going to be really bad. I'm glad it wasn't. A puppy party sounds incredible. OP must look really non-threatening though, because he brought them down to a room full of puppies and 8th grade girls. So if OP were an especially bad dude, that sounds like a place to do bad things. So I think both OP and the dad were pretty trusting here. Story 4. My wife and I have done Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Instacart for about 2 years now. We don't have too many stories, mostly just high, drunk, or naked people answering the door. My wife is in a few Facebook groups though, and we just heard about a woman who is delivering some food into a private gated home. The gate had to manually be opened by the homeowner, and he let her in no problem. But then after she delivered the food, he wouldn't let her leave. It took calling the police, them arriving and filing a report for her to be able to leave, and then learn that this was the 3rd time he's done this. Uber, though, won't ban him from their service. Story 5. Used to deliver pizza. I was 18. Brought a huge order to a house on a weekday evening where clearly a bunch of middle-aged friends were having a huge party. The door opened, a 40-something guy answered and yelled over his shoulder, "The pizza's here!" Everyone was clearly trashed already. It's around 7 p.m. He gives me a 1-second sign and goes back into the house. I hear him telling everyone to give up cash to pitch in for the order. Another 40-something wasted lady comes busting out past me. She goes to the passenger side of a truck and then just lies the top part of her body down inside the truck on the seat. And I think falls asleep for a few minutes. I'm on the doorstep holding 10 pizzas, door wide open. Rowdy 40-50-year-old's party is hopping, and the lady who has my money is asleep with her front half in the truck. I'm about to yell for someone else to help me when she gets up, then stumbles over to me. Conversation goes something like this. "How much is it?" $108.25. Wasted lady stares at a wad of bills in her hand and then shoves them all at me and says, "You count that." I count it. "You gave me $164. Is that too much?" "Well, I don't think so, but your bill is only $108.25. "Well, you count that." "Ma'am, it's $164. She stares at me a second, looks at the pizza, looks at the money, reaches into her pocket, pulls out another $10 bill, and slaps it on top of the pile of money. "And there's your tip." I unloaded the pizzas and took off as fast as I could. Best tip I've ever made in my life. Story 6. Many years ago, I was a driver for Pizza Hut. We had someone place an order and their home address was saved to our system. But in the notes, it said to deliver it to a hotel literally down the road from said home address. So I go to the hotel, knock on the door, and a dude answers in his boxers, with a girl in bed peeking around to see who was at the door. 99% sure I walked into an affair encounter. Story 7. One time during the early days of the pandemic, I got an order for like a ton of barbecue ribs from some newly opened restaurant in Atlanta. I got all this food, drove out to some random upscale Hilton hotel off the beaten path. After a ton of back and forth with the concierge, he finally directed me to the correct room. I finally reach it only to be met at the door by 2 naked folks and another 2 waiting on the bed in the hotel room. I'm not saying those barbecue ribs were going to be used in that orgy, I interrupted, but I can't definitively say there wasn't a connection. Story 8. I pick up 2 Filet-O-Fishes from McDonald's and drive them to the address listed as the customer's residence. The address is an entire mobile home park. I text the customer through Postmates to see if I can get more specific instructions. No answer. I call. No answer. I text again. No answer. I call again and a woman picks up. She sounds about 60 or 70. She attempts to give me directions about how I'm supposed to navigate to her place. But as I find out later, I'm on the wrong side of the street in the wrong half of the park to be following those directions. After several minutes of unsuccessfully navigating, she's yelling at me about her food getting cold, and accusing me of pranking her and not taking my job seriously. She asks where I am. I tell her the number of the closest mobile home, and she screams, "Well, that's a pretty long way from number 9, isn't it?" This is the first time she has mentioned she lives in home number 9. Yep, it is, I say. She uses some colorful language to describe me and Postmates in general and then hangs up. My phone notifies me that she has canceled her order, meaning I won't get full pay for that delivery. I feel like I have something to prove, so I drive among the mobile homes for a while and eventually find hers. I knock on the door. She opens it. "Is this the right place?" I ask, daring her to question my work ethic again. It is the right place. She acts all sweet like she wasn't just yelling at me a few minutes ago, and then gives me a fat tip of $20. Later that night, a guy offered to tip me with weed. Story 9. This is one of my favorite random interactions from my time as a delivery driver for a Japanese restaurant. I was sent to this house with an order of a steak hibachi and a couple of sushi rolls that added up to something like $19.60. I liked to call before I got to a place, just to give people a bit of a heads up. So by the time I got to the door, it was already open. In the doorway stood a chubby kid about 9 or 10 years old. That reminded me a lot of the kid from Bad Santa, but without the curly hair. I tell him the total as I pass off his food. He hands me a $20 bill and with a straight face, he smugly says, "Keep the change, pal." Immediately after, he closes the door and I just stood there for a second trying to process what just happened. When I got back to my car, I noticed the time and realized it was way too early for that kid to be home from school. I couldn't help but laugh at the whole situation. I wasn't even mad at getting a 40-cent tip, because this kid probably faked being sick so he could stay home from school, and was probably in there watching TV or playing video games while eating sushi and feeling like a big shot. I know I would have at that age. Story 10. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 3:30. Regular calls and orders his regular pizza. This guy was always nice to me, but I could tell he was doing some hard drugs, because he had lost so much weight, and started to get lesions on his forehead and hands as time went on. I get to his house around 4, maybe 4:15. Deliver the pizza, and I'm walking back to my car when I feel an iron grip on my shoulder and someone shouts, "You gotta get out of the way!" I turn and there's 4 or 5 county sheriff's deputies in full tactical gear. There were probably 15 to 20 police officers in total. They lead me behind one of their cars and tell me not to move, then bust this guy's door down and go in shouting, "Drug Task Force," and all that. I had to stay there for about an hour and had my car searched and everything. All that they found was a travel mug my mom had given me, which I had thought I lost. Never took another delivery to that guy. I wonder about him sometimes. I never found out the actual reasons for the raid, but I have my suspicions. OP, you can't seriously tell me you were surprised about not delivering to this guy anymore. I have a feeling he had a, change of residence. Story 11. Got a few good stories delivering for the Hut about 10 years ago. 2 of my best runs were delivering to an orgy. The guy was sitting on his porch in a bathrobe and had to run inside to get more cash, being very careful to block my view inside. But when his buddy came to the door, I got a good look. 4 chicks, 2 dudes from what I could see all naked, with plenty of booze, drugs, and paraphernalia laying around. Not much for a tip, but an interesting delivery I'll never forget. Another, I had a delivery to a mansion of a house. When I get there, nobody answers the door or answers the phone number listed. As I'm about to give up and go back to the store, 3 10 to 12-year-old kids run up, saying that they ordered pizza and their parents were out of town. While the parents were away, they taught themselves how to make homemade smoke bombs, which they used to inadvertently set their backyard on fire. I grabbed their hose and started putting out the fire. They didn't want to call the fire department in fear of getting in trouble, but I made them do it anyway. By the time the fire truck pulled up, I had taken care of the flames, and the kids emptied all 3 of their pockets into my hands for about a $40 tip. Story 12. Former delivery driver for a Chinese food restaurant. Our restaurant delivered beer. Not sure if that was even legal, but anyway. And there was one lady who would frequently order 2 egg rolls and 2 6-packs of way overpriced Corona. This relatively small lady, however, had lost mobility in her legs for whatever reason. And I guess it was most efficient for her to drag herself around her apartment, as she usually answered the door from her floor, and sometimes retreated to the kitchen to get money for payment using this method as well. After a while, it became clear that she had a problem, and it felt morally wrong for me to continue delivering her vice straight to her front door. But she tipped well, and my bosses were not turning down her business. Until one day she made her usual order, and as I arrived, she didn't have the funds for her order. As I was already uncomfortable completing these deliveries for her, I told her I couldn't provide her order without payment. And she dragged herself, limp legs behind her, down the breezeway of her apartment complex, crying and begging me for the booze. Still haunts me sometimes. Story 13. I delivered pizza in a college town about 15 years ago. I took an order in the early afternoon to an apartment building I'd never been to before. It had a locked entry and buzzer-style door, which was unusual for the area. It was usually cheap student housing, or the hallways of the apartment buildings were open-air style. It takes a few minutes, but someone finally buzzes the door and lets me in. I walk towards the apartment and see the door is open and can hear really loud music. I get to the door and I see the TV is on with full volume, and across the room is a radio also full volume. I look to the left and a man is walking out of the kitchen and I see he is in a hospital gown. His hair is kind of dirty and messed up and he seems completely out of it. I tell him the total and he starts looking around for the money. Yes, the gown was tied in the back, but it did not hold against the constant bending over looking in various areas. At this point, this is already one of the weirdest things to happen to me, but then it kicks up a notch. The college town I was in is Lawrence, Kansas, and anyone who has lived there, especially near downtown, will probably know of the peace sign guy. This guy looked like your classic Vietnam War vet. Long hair, sunglasses, leather jacket with no shirt, jeans, and big boots. He would walk around with a cigarette in his mouth, throwing up the peace sign to anyone and everyone. He was mostly harmless, but he could get upset and lash out verbally at people, although I didn't know that at the time. So who should appear at the door behind me, now boxing me into the apartment between him and hospital gown man? Peace sign guy, and he is pissed. He starts yelling about the noise, and he's having to scream pretty loudly just to be heard. Hospital gown man starts yelling right back at him. He still hasn't found the money. I contemplate trying the patio door and running for it. Finally, peace sign guy leaves, hospital gown man finds the money and proceeds to pull out a massive wad of crisp 20s. He tipped pretty well too. Story 14. Scenario I've had as a delivery customer. Around 04-05, I lived in New Jersey with no car, but did have a fast metabolism. So I ordered from the local pizza place pretty much every other night. The owner and I loosely became friends after what was probably 100 plus orders, to the point where more than once he let me order and pay the next time. Delivery was usually done by someone in a beaten-up car, or at best, a few-year-old sedan. One summer night, I placed an order for delivery right before closing. About an hour later, a dark car creeps up the driveway. Despite it being pitch black out, I could tell by the reflections on the paint that something was different. It was downright surreal, like a CG rendering of a fake car. This is weird, I think to myself. Who can this be? The delivery is going to be here any minute, so I hope this bozo turns around and gets out of here pretty quick. As it comes closer, I notice the design is unlike anything I've ever seen before. Eventually, it pulls all the way up, does a K-turn, and, much to my surprise, parks. I can now faintly make out a logo. 2 R's stacked on top of each other. I didn't know much about cars, but I did know enough to know what 2 R's meant, along with the fact that anything made by said car manufacturer costs more than most luxury homes. Surely this is a mistake. What is this person doing in my driveway in the middle of the night? I wonder this to myself as I start to grow slightly concerned. The driver's door opens and a man calmly gets out. He He looks like he just stepped off the set of a James Bond movie. Now, if I didn't know much about cars, I surely knew even less about suits. But I could already tell this guy's suit was worth more than my life. He suavely reaches into the car and pulls out a pizza. My pizza. He walks up the driveway and hands it to me. At this point, my mouth was opening and closing, but no words were coming out. I was like a fish out of water. I immediately started fumbling with the damp, sweaty dollars I had in my fist trying to count out a tip. And he shakes his head and says, "No." Then he tells me to enjoy my pizza and have a good night. At this point, I slowly nodded, not knowing what else to do. He got back in his car, quietly pulled out of the driveway, and drove off into the night. A few days later, I decided to get some exercise and walked up to the pizza place rather than getting delivery. The owner was there and I mentioned the peculiar experience I had. He started laughing and told me, "That was my brother. He's the VP of Finance for JP Morgan in New York City. I forgot to give your pizza to the delivery driver before he left and I had to clean up for at least an hour, so I couldn't deliver it myself. My brother just happened to stop by to see me on his way home, so I asked him to drop it off to you since you're one of my most regular customers." Story 15. Pick up this big 1 a.m. Macca's order of what can only be described as stoner food. Ice creams with all the toppings at once, every burger with lots of extra cheese. The delivery is in an area I'm not familiar with, so it doesn't strike me that there's no place to drop it until I get to the drop-off address and there's an empty lot, with a very closed-looking community center and nothing else. I got out to see if there's anyone partying in the lot or something, but nothing. So I called the customer, who not only doesn't answer, but their mobile service isn't even connected. So I waited and, being very new to this, drove back to the Macca's. I considered offering the food, most of which I can't eat, to some guys hanging out there, but decided that sketchy cold food from some random who pulled into the parking lot probably wouldn't appeal. So I just left all these bags in the parking lot. It was like $80 worth of food, too. I remember from the last time I had to say this restaurant name that I did it wrong and people in the comments were mad at me. Guess what? I still don't know how, and I probably did it wrong again. We don't have them where I'm at. Sorry. Story 16. Finished a Postmates delivery in the Hollywood Hills. When I got pinged to pick up an order at the Starbucks that's just off Laurel Canyon, or in that general area, I can't remember exactly. I liked delivering in this area because usually the tips were very, very good. The person ordering wanted 4 tall iced coffees with no ice. I shrugged that part off because rich LA people are all frickin' weirdos. But I was annoyed because I had to place it, which means I had to go make those annoying requests instead of just picking up the drinks. I go into the Starbucks and the lady working the counter says, "We've been expecting you." And I was like, okay. If you're Postmates courier, you know that if you have to place the order, the restaurant would not be expecting you. Then she tells me that this is Ariana Grande's exact order, and that I will be delivering to her house. It wasn't her name on the app, but it did occur to me that a celeb of her caliber would probably use an assumed name or have an assistant order for her. I still had my doubts though, just because I'm a naturally skeptical person. When I got to the address, I had to enter a key code at the gate, which wasn't unusual for the area. But when I saw the view and saw that it was basically its own compound of multiple different houses, I figured that even if it wasn't Ariana Grande's house, it had to be someone obscenely rich and famous. I pulled up to the house number specified in the app and texted that I was there, per the instructions. The person who greeted me was a middle-aged 4'10" Latina woman with a limp. She said thanks, and I left. Now, I'm not the most up-to-date on celebrity news and all that, but Ariana Grande, 4'10", Latina woman with a limp? I don't know. Did OP meet Ariana Grande?